Hello again guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are taking a look at the MILVIZ Cessna 310R. The quality add-ons seem to be coming thick and fast for Microsoft Flight Simulator at the moment, and the 310 is certainly no exception there. I argued previously that MILVIZ's FG-1D Corsair was one of the most feature-complete aircraft for the sim, and I think the Cessna 310 very much follows that trend going forward. Some pretty incredible features with the add-on, we'll take a look at those as we go. Today's video is going to be a full review. The product hasn't released just yet, and MILVIZ have stated that there will be an update to the aircraft about a week after release, but nonetheless they are happy for me to take a look and review the product ahead of time. And quite rightly so, the product is already in an excellent state, as you'll see for yourselves during the video. We're currently on New Zealand's South Island at Timaru Airport. We're going to be taking the aircraft over towards Glentanner. As usual, we'll be carrying out a full cold and dark start. We'll talk about the aircraft en route, take a look at some of the features and systems. We'll land ourselves in Glentanner, get the aircraft shut down, and we'll finish up the review looking a little bit more closely at further details of the Cessna 310. Lots to cover today. Once again, the 310 is a very comprehensive, very interesting product, certainly one to keep an eye on for those GA flyers amongst you. As always guys, I do hope you enjoy the video. Hopefully it will give you a good sense of what the product has to offer. If you do enjoy what you see, then please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel. As usual, let's head for the cockpit and we'll get things underway. So welcome to the cockpit of the rather excellent little MILVIZ Cessna 310. It's a fairly cloudy day here on the ground in New Zealand, but I gather that's somewhat par for the course. Anyway, as I say, the aircraft is an absolute gem, so we'll get things started up, see what we find on our way. So far we've carried out the cockpit pre-flight, we've also carried out the external walk-around, so we're now on to the before start checks. For that, the pre-flight inspection has been completed, cabin door is latched and secure, control locks have been removed, seatbelts and shoulder harnesses are secure, the brakes are tested and set. Fuel selectors are both on the main tanks. Landing gear switch is selected down. Mixtures can go to fully rich. You'll notice really nice sound effects. Again, they are prevalent throughout the aircraft. Props are set fully forward. Throttles we can crack 1 inch. All switches are off, just the exception there being the nav lights. We'll leave those on. Circuit breakers are checked in. Certainly worth checking. The circuit breakers are actually modelled and you do get random systems failures if you have that selected. Emergency alternator fill switch is off and the emergency avionics power switch is off. They're both off in the guarded position. Avionics master switch is off. Auxiliary fuel pump switches are both off. Battery and alternator switches can go on. Lighting rheostats are set as required. Landing gear position indicator, we have 3 greens. All warning lights. We'll just work our way through a couple of those, just to show they work. You can press to test. And as you'll notice throughout the flight, the systems modelling of the 310 is really rather comprehensive overall. Altimeter is set, the clock is set. Cowl flaps are open and in the locked position. Fuel quantities are checked. We've got pretty much full fuel in both of the main tanks. The aux tank should be empty, and sure enough they are. Interestingly, on the 310 the primary tanks are actually the wingtip tanks and the auxiliary tanks are in the wing. That's a little bit unusual. Cabin air controls are set. Alternate air controls are both in. External lights, so we've got the nav lights on. We'll take the anti-collision light on there as well for the start. And we are now ready for the start, so checking that both prop areas are clear, which they are. Magneto switches can go on. We'll be starting the left engine first, so we'll prime on the left. We'll give it about 5 seconds. And the auxiliary fuel pump can go to low. We'll give everyone a shout. Clear prop! Close up the DV window once again, and we can hit the starter. So good start there on the left. Really nice start sounds overall on the aircraft. And really the engine sounds throughout the entire range of the flight sound really good. You'll hear those of course as we go. So adjusting the throttle to maintain 1000 RPM. You can see the oil pressure has come up nicely there, so we do have a good start on the left. We'll do the same on the right, so prime switch can go over to the right. Boost pump can go to low. And once again, just checking no one's around the prop, everything looks good, we'll hit the starter. And again, good to start on the right, idling at 1000 RPM, oil pressure has come up, everything looking good there. We'll check our alternators. So left alternator looks good, right alternator looks good. The before taxi checks, passenger briefing is not required, the avionics master can go on. And we can set up our avionics, so coming down to our GTN 750 units. We'll hit continue on both sides, just work our way through the various prompts. We'll just wait for the TORS test complete.
TORS system test OK.
And we'll just clear up our messages. So nice simple flight plan for us today. We're going to be taking off out of Timaru. We'll be tracking out towards the Romeo Yankee DME. That's Mount Mary. And after that we'll be tracking in towards Glentanner, which is November Zulu Golf Tango. So as I say, very simple flight plan, we'll just copy that across on the other side. So Romeo Yankee, once again Mount Mary, and then on towards Glentanner. So we've got the flight plan on both sides, we'll take the map on the right. You can see we're more or less down at the threshold for runway 02, so we're going to be taxiing out towards the holding point 02. It's a slight intersection departure, but we've got plenty of runway here to get off the ground. In terms of our cruising out, we're going to go for around 6,000 feet. We'll see how we go in terms of the cloud there. Anyway, we'll make our way down to the holding point and we'll hold there, carry out our run-up checks, and then we'll go. So down at the holding point, there's not too much wind to speak of, so just going to carry out the run-up in our present position. Before takeoff checks, the park brake is set, fuel quantities are checked, fuel selectors. Once again we have both main tanks selected. Alternate air controls are in, cowl flaps are both open, elevator rudder and aileron trim are set for takeoff. Wing flaps are up, avionics and radios are set, flight instruments. So aerodrome elevation 89 feet, the altimeter looks good. HSI there showing a heading of about 289, and same there on the compass. Flight instruments are checked. For the run up we're going to come up to 1700 RPM. So 1700. Alternators are checked. Vacuum system is checked. Magnetos, we'll carry out a mag check. So first on the right engine, we'll come onto the right mag. And you can see there is a slight drop there in the RPM. Once again, failures are modelled if you have them turned on, so well worth checking all of the systems before you depart. And similarly, if you go for the rental mode option with the aircraft, then systems will be left in different positions each time you enter the aircraft, so things could be incorrectly set for your flight. It is really worth running through the checklist. Anyway, mags look good, props will feather. We should see the RPM drop back to 1200 RPM. And sure enough we do. Going back up to full RPM, we'll just cycle once more. So props looking good, mixtures are set fully rich, engine instruments are checked, all of our T's and P's looking good. We'll come back to 1000 RPM. And again, temperatures and pressures looking good. Quadrant friction lock has been adjusted. Exterior lights will set, so strobe lights can go on. We'll get the landing light on. Ice protection equipment not required. All cabin doors and windows are closed. And lastly, we'll just get the transponder on. We'll set that to out. So having a good look down final. There's no traffic there, and we should be clear upwind as well. Sure enough, looks like we are. Get ourselves lined up, runway 02, so park brake off. 310 taxis really nicely. It struck me pretty much as soon as we started taxiing. It feels really good in terms of response. It will turn on the rudder pedals, but you do need a little bit of brake occasionally just to encourage it around the corner. So for our takeoff, we're looking to come up to full power. We should see 2700 RPM. Be a flaps up takeoff. Again, we do have enough runway to cater for that. We're looking to raise the nose wheel around 83 knots. We should be lifting off around 92 knots. And then for the climb, we're looking to climb initially around 107 knots. So once again, we are all set. Off the brakes and coming up on the power. So there's full power, RPM looks good, T's and P's are checked. And again, the aircraft handles really nicely on the rudder here during the takeoff. Going back on the yoke. And again, feels great in rotation. I have to say the handling really struck me on the aircraft, that it's nice overall. Anyway, we have positive climb, we'll tap the brakes, the gear can come up. Needing a little bit of right rudder here as well, just to keep that ball centered up on the turn and slip indicator. And just pitching down slightly more here to go for our 107 knots. Come back to a climb power setting, so we'll come back to 24.5 inches manifold pressure. And 2500 RPM. Really nice changes in sounds as well with the RPM adjustment. And we'll make our turn now out towards the west. So speed's looking good, we're doing 120 knots, that's pretty reasonable for a cruise climb. Let's say we'll try climb up to around 6,000 feet, hopefully that'll have us sitting between these two cloud layers. And as you can see from the map, and you can quite clearly see out the window as well, we've got some high terrain to negotiate en route. Just going to be flying visually today, so we're not too worried about en route terrain heights, we'll just stay visually clear of the terrain. Overall, the 310 hand flies very nicely. Controls feel good, not overly sensitive. Pretty good balance between the controls, feeling, again, not overly sensitive, but also not too heavy. I would say they're more towards the sensitive side than they are the heavy side, mind you. But again, very smooth, very easy to hand fly. Felt really good during the takeoff. So come up through 2,500 feet, doing a heading of about 245 here just to intercept back towards our planned course. Again, we're not too worried about navigation, but nonetheless the planned course actually works out quite nicely for us. That takes us through a little bit of a gap in the hills. Up through 3,000 feet now, we're doing about 114 knots over the ground versus about 110 through the air. And we've got 40 miles to run at the moment, inbound towards Mount Mary. In terms of our temperatures and pressures, just come up again slightly on the manifold pressure. Obviously that's falling off here as we climb. T's and P's look good, EGT looks good, fuel quantities are checked, and we're up through 3,000 feet now, so we'll start reducing our mixtures. We'll come back to the climb setting, and we're coming up through 4,000 feet. So mixtures are set, and up through 4,000 again, just negotiating our way through the first of these cloud layers. We'll probably weave our way through towards Mount Mary, making sure we stay clear of the clouds. We do have some de-icing systems on board. As you can see, we've got surface de-ice, prop de-ice, as well as windshield alcohol, but nonetheless we'll try and avoid any icing conditions. And we're still slightly out to the right of our planned track at the moment, but again, just adjusting our track to stay clear of the cloud. Really beautiful afternoon here though on the South Island of New Zealand. Hopefully, once we get a little bit higher here above some of this cloud, we'll see some of the terrain. It's really spectacular en route. I fancied a New Zealand flight in the aircraft, they never tend to disappoint. Up through 5,000, so one to go. And at our current power setting, getting about 1,000 feet per minute rate of climb out of the aircraft. Approaching full throttle now as we come up through 5,500 feet. And once we've got ourselves leveled off at 6,000, we'll get the autopilot in, test the functionality there, although I could be wrong, but I think once again it's just using the default Sabre autopilot coding. So 6,000, getting ourselves leveled off. Aircraft just a tiny bit twitchy in pitch. Okay, so nicely leveled off at 6,000. We are on our heading. The autopilot can go in. We'll go into heading and out. Captured at 6,100 there. So we'll just regain. Then for our cruise power setting, we'll go for 24 inches. Keep a nice quick cruise speed. Again, just about able to maintain that at this altitude, almost at full throttle. RPMs can come back to 2,300. Temperatures and pressures looking good. Again, we'll just reduce the mixtures back towards peak EGT. And we can go slightly richer that. So mixtures are set. Fuel quantities looking good. We're coming through about 275 gallons there on the left, about 280 on the right. Boost pumps can go off. And landing light can go off initially into the retractor position. We'll bring it back to the off position momentarily. Cowl flaps. So just checking our cylinder head temperatures. Still fairly high there at the moment, so we'll leave the cowl flaps open. Props are set. And trims are set. Just coming back onto our flight plan course there, you can see the CDI bar coming in. Landing light can go back to the off position. Once we hit the CDI bar, we'll go into nav. You see there, looking at the map, that we're more or less going to thread our way through a bit of gap in the terrain out towards Mount Mary. You can see that just off the nose, and 6,000 feet is just about going to keep us clear. So there's the CDI bar, we'll go into nav. We have now captured the out at 6,000. So overall the autopilot seems to work reasonably well. We may just adjust our heading again later on, just to come out slightly more towards the northwest, just to again clear the highest of the terrain. So we do have a nice high cruise power setting here. That's giving us about 185 knots indicated and about 195 knots TAS. And now 26 miles to run. Again, still not picking up that DME. It could be an issue with the Mount Mary DME. Wouldn't put it past the sim. Not entirely sure on that one. And again, we do have a little bit of cloud ahead of us. The terrain is slightly lower out towards the northwest, so we'll just adjust our heading. It's around 290. So it's 290, we'll come back into heading. And that should keep us clear of the cloud and the worst of the terrain. You can see though, really stunning scenery. We are using the Orbex New Zealand mesh, which certainly goes some ways towards enhancing New Zealand, but nonetheless it's a spectacular part of the world, even in its default state in the sim. Really hoping at some point as well that we'll get a New Zealand update for the sim. Certainly it's a part of the world that deserves it. It's probably one of my favourite areas to come flying in. And the MILVIZ 310 perfectly suited to this sort of flying. As you'll probably already have noticed for yourselves, a really excellent product. It sounds great, looks pretty good. We will talk about the texturing more later on, but overall very nicely done. Pretty immaculate, I have to say. The functionality is excellent, the systems are excellent. And the aircraft has some additions that I've never seen before. For example, as quirky as it is, we have the ability to set how dirty the aircraft is, and that can also change based on the amount that you fly. Again, we'll look at that more later on. The systems seem to be very comprehensive, as does the systems failure modelling. Just check our messages here on the GTN 750. Coming into some airspace in less than 10 minutes, we're going to disregard that for the flight today. Yeah, currently for today's flight we've got the rare system failure option enabled, so we're not expecting any failures, but nonetheless there is potential. At some point, of course, we'll have to do a flight with frequent failures enabled and see what we find along the way. So it's turning back out towards the west, just to come through this little pass in the mountains. We'll try and stay clear of the terrain as much as is possible. Ideally in the real world we'd probably have climbed a little bit higher here, but didn't really want to do that for the flight today as it's a pretty short hop and I wanted to enjoy the scenery as we go. All that being said, it does look as though the cloud base is a little bit higher up ahead, so we will just climb up to 7,000 feet. So we've got 7,000 sets. We'll just make that a little bit of a cruise climb, so we'll go for around 300 feet per minute rate of climb. But we're going to be descending fairly shortly, so we don't really want to be climbing a whole lot higher if we can avoid it. Nonetheless, I think the cloud is just a little bit too dense really to be weaving our way through, otherwise we'll be going left and right to no end. And it'll take us quite a long time to reach Mount Mary if we're going back and forth. Just increase that rate of climb up to around 700 feet per minute. And again we'll just come slightly out to the right. We'll hand fly the aircraft a little bit more. As we approach Glentanner we'll fly it into the circuit, most likely coming in for a landing onto the southerly runway. So 9 miles to run towards Mount Mary. We've only got 15 miles thereafter to run in towards Glentanner. Doing about 3 miles a minute over the ground. So about 5 minutes from Mount Mary towards the airfield. And in terms of aerodrome elevation, up at 2,000 feet, so we've got about 5,000 feet to lose. So as soon as we hit the DME there, we'll start our descent and we'll go with 1,000 feet per minute. That should have us arriving pretty much bang on. Bearing in mind, of course, that we don't want to arrive at 2,000 feet, we want to arrive above aerodrome elevation. But that'll have us levelling off a little bit early, which is great, to give us time to get ourselves configured. As I say, probably coming in on the southerly runway, there shouldn't be too much wind. We do have a bank of trees at the southerly end of the runway, so we don't really want to be coming in from the north, even though it would be a straight approach. So we'll come in for a left-hand pattern onto the southerly runway. There are hills out towards the west as well, so we want to definitely make a left-hand entry. So clearing the clouds for the time being, looks like we've got a fairly clear run in towards the lake itself. And clear of the worst of the high terrain now, which is great. So we'll just start nudging our heading back round towards the west. Again, really easy to navigate with the TDS GTN 750 unit. We can just see our blue trend vector there, just nudge that around towards the Romeo Yankee DME. So nicely established now and bound towards Mount Mary. And we're just following the course of the lake out towards the north. That leads us in towards the Tasman River and ultimately the Tasman Lake, although the Tasman Lake is out towards the north of Glentanner up towards Mount Cook and Mount Cook Airport. Just going to cut the corner slightly here again just to clear the clouds. And just overhead the DME now, so as I said, we'll start a descent. We said 2,000 foot aerodrome elevation, so we'll descend down to 3,000 feet. Coming out of out once again. And we'll go with 700 feet per minute rate of descent. That should have us arriving pretty much exactly as we want. Overhead the airfield around plus 1,000 feet. Keep the power setting for the time being. We'll build up some speed here in the descent. In terms of our descent checks, fuel selectors are both set on the main tanks. Auxiliary fuel pumps can go too low. Power is set as required. We'll just keep reducing the power though, of course, as we descend. The manifold pressure is going to come up. Cowl flaps, again checking our cylinder head temperatures. They've come down quite nicely now, so we'll close up the cowl flaps for the time being. And mixtures we can just increase periodically as we continue the descent. Altimeter is set, and that's the descent checklist complete. A little bit of buffeting there as you come up through 200 knots, that's a really nice effect. Not using FS Realistic today, so that is presumably native to the aircraft. We'll just come back slightly off the power here, we'll maintain around 200 knots. It does seem to be pretty smooth conditions here, but nonetheless, we don't really want to have the aircraft buffeting around. So down through 6,000 feet. So just have a quick look at the runway, see what the runway heading is. In terms of the runways, we're looking at 3315. Just increase our descent rate here as well, just to get us below this cloud layer as quickly as we can. We don't really need the CDI bar anymore, so we'll set 150 for the runway, just to give us a nice reference there on the HSI. And just continuing to come back on the power now with that increased descent rate, continuing to come up on the mixture levers. Just about keeping visual, clear of the clouds. One thing I will say, there's pretty much no sound change with a reduction in power. Obviously most of the sound does come from the RPM, but nonetheless I was expecting to hear a little bit of change there. We're back through 17 inches on the manifold pressure now, and even coming fully back to idle I've noticed there's pretty much no change in sound there. So you can see Glentanner off at our 11 o'clock, just down off the edge of the lake. As I said, we'll do a little bit of hand flying, so we'll take out the autopilot. Fairly high still here at the moment, so we'll come more or less back to idle power. We'll just stay north of the gear warning horn. And again, we're going to be flying out towards the north. We'll come back round in a left-hand circuit for the southerly runway. Just start reducing that descent rate now that we're down below the cloud layer. The aircraft definitely naturally wants to fly left wing low. You will need a little bit of rudder and or aileron trim in there to counteract that when you first fly the 310. I've trimmed most of that out myself at this point. So running through our downwind checks, the brakes are checked and off, undercarriage will hold, mixtures are rich, fuel pumps are on, fuel quantities are checked, flight instruments are checked, landing light can go on, and harness is secure. Still a touch high here on downwind, so we'll just reduce our speed slightly further here. We'll take the gear down just to get a little bit of drag. We'll take the first stage of flaps as well. That's just going to help us increase our descent rate. And the runway now just buried below the left-hand engine, but it is down there. We're in a reasonable position for a downwind. Just coming up on 3,000 feet, so about 1,000 feet now above aerodrome elevation. Again, absolutely stunning scenery. Unfortunately, can't quite make out Mount Cook there, or perhaps it's the peak just off our 11 o'clock, but cloud coverage over most of the mountains. And we've got the Tasman Lake out to the north, as I mentioned. So speed's looking good. We'll come up on the power to maintain that. Just coming up through 1,000 feet aerodrome elevation. And looking pretty good now for a base turn. We're clear on final. Take full flaps. And looking to maintain around 110 knots here as we come down final. Again, the aircraft really good to hand fly. Very smooth on the controls. Control response feels great. And just coming around onto final, so pitch can go back to fully fine. Undercarriage is down, we have 3 greens. Flaps are set. Just coming through 500. Landing clearance isn't required, the runway is clear. And you can hear for yourselves there is quite a significant change in engine tone with the prop RPM, as I mentioned, just not with the power setting. There are those trees down at the southerly end of the runway, so as I said, best avoided. Aircraft feeling a little bit heavy in pitch as the speed comes back. And coming off the throttles. Holding ourselves off. A little bit twitchy there in pitch, losing a little bit of elevator authority just before the touchdown. Landing was reasonable. I've done better, I've done worse. And just gently coming onto the brakes to get the aircraft slowed down. Yeah, the aircraft perhaps just felt a touch as though it dropped out of the sky there on the end at me. I don't know whether or not that's true to life of the 310, but otherwise a really impressive, really enjoyable aircraft to fly. Looks like we've got a fairly busy apron here on the ground in Glentanner. So we'll hold off on our after landing checks, make sure we keep clear of all of the aircraft here. Looks like we've got a marshaller off the nose, so we'll follow him in. We are clear on the right wingtip. And same on the left, we certainly don't want to be damaging any aircraft that are far more expensive than ours. So working our way in towards the marshaller, unfortunately they're going to be getting a little bit blinded here probably by our landing light. In reality, of course, it's much easier to just fill down and flick the landing light off, but a little bit trickier to do in the sim when you've got to be physically looking at things. Anyway, park brake is on. There's 1000 RPM. The after landing checks, auxiliary fuel pumps can go off. Cow flaps can go to open. Wing flaps can come up. We'll get that landing light off. Once again, that can come back to the retract position. Strobe light can go off. And for the shutdown, the park brake is set. Avionics master switch can go off. All switches except the battery, alternator and magnetos can go off. Again, we'll leave the anti-collision light and the nav lights on. Landing light switch can go back to the off position. So switches are set as per the checklist. Auxiliary fuel pumps are off. Throttles can come back to idle. And mixtures can go back to idle cutoff. So we do have two good rundowns, nice sounds there as well for the shutdown. Battery and alternators can go off, the gang bars do actually work. Another nice little feature there. Magneto switches are off, control lock we'll leave for later on. Fuel selectors we'll leave on, we'll be returning back towards Timaru later on. So we'll just get the cockpit door opened up. And that's our shutdown checklist complete. So safely down on the ground here in Glentanner. As usual, before we finish up the review, we'll just take a look at some of the details of the aircraft a little bit more closely. We've already had a pretty good look at the external modelling en route, but we'll just take a look at some of the areas there that we didn't get to see during the flight. As with most Microsoft Flight Simulator aircraft, we have a number of configurable options on the Cessna 310. You can see here, for example, we can open up the cabin door, the baggage door. We also have baggage compartments in both of the engine pods as well as on the nose of the aircraft. The aircraft also comes with the option to fit chocks, engine intake covers, pitot covers, things of that nature. And the detailing throughout the airframe is really nice. You can see there, for example, on the engine intake covers, a very nice job in terms of the modelling and the texturing. You can also see though that the stripes there on the engine cowling are a little bit fuzzy, but of course that's being incredibly picky, it's really just for your information. Once again, overall the MILVIZ Cessna 310 is a very nicely modelled, very nicely textured, really immaculate aircraft. The same is very much true in the cockpit. Again, we did get a pretty good look at that during the flight, but we'll look at some of the details that we didn't get to see. The instrumentation is all very nicely modelled, very nicely textured, very smooth in terms of its operation, and you can get up close to the panel as close as you like and the texturing will remain very crisp and very clear. The only minor point I would make, particularly on the instrumentation, I think that the textures there look a little bit more painted as opposed to photorealistic, and generally that's true throughout the cockpit. That does seem to be a style that MILVIZ prefers, and I know it is a style that many of you prefer as well. It's really just a personal preference. Attention to detail is absolutely excellent throughout the aircraft, though it was very hard to find any textures that looked out of place. All of the colorization looks really good, and even the more hidden away areas of the cockpit. As usual, a really top-notch effort from MILVIZ. Systems-wise as well, the aircraft is a tour de force really for a GA aircraft in the sim. More or less everything works in the cockpit. We've even looked at the fact that the circuit breakers are modelled. And again, not only are they modelled, but you will get random failures on the aircraft if you have the option turned on, and certain circuit breakers might pop, certain instruments might fail. That of course really goes to offer a much more in-depth experience within the sim. Lastly, we do have the option to display passenger models down the back. And again, I think that's a really nice feature. It certainly just ramps up the immersion that little bit more when you look behind, and you do have some people on board the aircraft. Similarly, you can display a co-pilot in the right seat, and that'll just use the default Asobo pilot model. The 310 comes with a number of avionics options, which is really great to see. We can have a simple radio stack. We can also have the default GNS 530 unit, as well as being able to fit both the PMS GTN 750 and the TDS GTN XI units. Lastly, as far as the cockpit goes, and certainly one of the most impressive features with the aircraft, we have the typical onboard tablet, but the amount of options and configuration here that we have is way above and beyond any other add-on that we've seen in the sim to date. Firstly, we have your typical sorts of options in terms of doors. We can open up the various aircraft doors as we saw during the external shots. And similarly, we can load up various passengers and baggage items, again as we saw just a moment ago. Down the bottom, another nice touch that MILVIZ have added, we do actually have a passenger comfort meter, so depending on how you fly the aircraft, it will actually affect your passenger comfort. I believe as well it even takes into account things such as cabin temperature, cabin altitude. It's probably not a feature that I would look at much myself, but again, if you are into that sort of thing, it would certainly force you to fly the aircraft a little bit more accurately and certainly a little bit more conservatively. Onto the services page of the tablet, and here we can fuel up our aircraft, both the tip tanks and the auxiliary tanks. We can also choose whether or not to clean up the aircraft. The airframe will get dirty over a period of time, and you can also change the rate at which dirt will accrue on the aircraft. So perhaps if you're flying in the backcountry or into various bush strips, you'd probably expect to build up dirt more quickly than if you were operating into fairly sizable airports with hardened runways. You've already seen the aircraft in the clean configuration. Of course, we're not going to go out with a dirty aircraft on the channel. But just to give you the contrast, here's an example of the aircraft in its fully clean state. And here's the aircraft fully dirtied up and ready for a wash. The options menu of the tablet is again a brilliant feature of the aircraft. We have a whole host of options here that really change the experience of the 310 and elevate it above most other add-ons in the sim. Firstly, we have our avionics suite options. We've already touched on those. Next, we have our initial state. We have both a default, a rental and an owned option there. If memory serves me correctly, default will have the aircraft start in a cold and dark state each time you come to use it. Rental will have the aircraft broadly in a cold and dark state, but you may find that the previous user, quote unquote, may have left various switches and systems in the incorrect position. So very important when you do come to the aircraft there that you run through the checklists in their entirety. And the owned position offers a persistent state such that the aircraft will be in whatever state you left it in at the end of your last flight. We do also have the option to show the user registration on the aircraft, your own customizable registration. That will be in addition though to the registration painted on the aircraft, which is a little bit of a shame. For the large part, the paint schemes that come with the aircraft are not customizable. There's only one paint scheme where you can add a custom registration. In terms of realism options, firstly we have individualization. I believe that means that each individual paint scheme or variant of the aircraft in the sim will behave differently based on your last use of the aircraft. So a persistent state for each airframe or each livery, as well as any technical issues that you might have had with the aircraft when previously using it, as opposed to that state and those issues being blanketed across all of the 310 airframes that you have in the sim. Engine realism, systems realism and wear and tear are reasonably self-explanatory there. Obviously with engine realism turned on, you do have to operate the engines within their real-world limits, otherwise you risk damaging them. The same goes with systems realism. And wear and tear, of course, the more you fly the aircraft and the more aggressively that you fly it as well, you're more likely to induce systems failures or issues. Lastly, down the bottom we do have failure options, so we can have failures turned off if you want to fly the aircraft a little bit more casually. We also have rare, occasional and frequent failures. During the flight today we were using the rare option. Lastly, we have the status page of the tablet, and really that's essentially our maintenance hangar. We can observe all of the various systems on the aircraft, see whether or not they need an inspection or an overhaul. So again, overall what the MILVIZ Cessna 310 offers in terms of its features, particularly with regards to the failure modelling, is pretty much second to none in terms of what we've seen with Microsoft Flight Simulator to date. Anyway, that just about covers off most of the aircraft's features. Just before we finish up the review with my overall conclusion, we're going to head back up into the air and we'll carry out a little bit of single engine work before we finish up. So obviously with the Cessna 310 being a twin, we'll just carry out a little bit of single engine work, see how the aircraft performs there. Just noting ahead of time once again the really beautiful scenery. We've got Tasman Lake just out to the north, Glentanner's back down to the south behind us. And also worth noting, it looks like we've had a left vacuum pump failure there as well with the random failures enabled. That's quite interesting. So we probably ought to fail the left engine as opposed to the right. We'll just take the autopilot out. And again, that slight left wing down tendency, so we're just going to trim that out ahead of time. I'll do for the time being. So we'll come back on the left mixture. And you can see the aircraft behaving quite aggressively there as the left engine dies. So feeding in some right rudder to get that ball centred up. Pretty much that's full right rudder, still not quite centred up there on the turn slip indicator. Anyway, we'll leave the mixture where it is, we'll come up to full pitch. We've already got full power on the live engine. Just pitch the nose down, build up a little bit more speed here just to try and get some airflow going over the rudder. As I say, I've got full right rudder already. You can see the ball there on the turn slip indicator still fully out to the right. We'll try feathering the left engine. So the prop is now in the feather position. So there goes the left engine, and you can see at this point I've actually reduced my rudder input. The ball is now centred up, so we've lost a ton of drag there on the left hand side. That's obviously been modelled, which is great. And looks like now as a result as well we're going to be able to maintain a much higher speed here, even with just the single engine operative. Looks like we're going to maintain around 130 knots probably by the time the speed's balanced out. So overall the single engine handling of the aircraft does seem to be pretty nice. Definitely a significant difference between having the prop feathered or unfeathered. We'll just reduce the speed back below blue line there and see how we go in terms of rudder authority. As the speed rolls back, definitely having to feed in some more rudder. So I've got full right rudder now. You can see the ball is centred, but we're just starting to lose that as we come through 105 knots. And progressively there we're starting to unbalance the aircraft as the speed reduces. So again, overall pretty nice modelling I would say there from MILVIZ. Final test, we'll just let that speed continue to roll back. We'll go into a stall. Bit of buffeting there, that's really great. Again, that's not courtesy of FS Realistic. There's the stall warning horn as well. Dropping out to the left, keeping fully back on the controls for now. We've still got the right rudder in as well. So the aircraft tentatively just dropping a wing there, not really going to a spin. We'll take the rudder input out, just keeping fully back on the stick. And overall with full back elevator there, looks like we go into a pretty lazy spin. Easy to recover as well. And again, really nice sound effects on the aircraft. We've got a little bit high speed there, just kept it below VNE. But lots of buffeting, lots of shaking, the aircraft really not liking that manoeuvre overall. So there you go guys, I hope you enjoyed our outing in the MILVIZ Cessna 310. Certainly a beautiful part of the world and what I think is a pretty beautiful aircraft overall. As I mentioned during the introduction, I think the Cessna 310 is one of the most feature complete aircraft that we've seen for the sim, or indeed any sim. As usual, I'll break everything down into my positives and negatives, but to be clear, there's not really a whole lot that I have that's negative to say about the Cessna. We've already talked a little bit about the cockpit textures. They're very good, they're immaculate, and the cockpit does look really nice, but again, to my mind they do have that slightly more painted look as opposed to looking photorealistic, and that does seem to be MILVIZ's preferred option for cockpit texturing. Many people like that, I know some people prefer it, it's not my personal preference, but again, the cockpit still looks excellent. In terms of the flight model, again it is one of the best GA aircraft that I've flown in the sim to date. It did however feel a little bit twitchy in pitch, and the aircraft did feel a little bit strange during the flare, but otherwise a very solid flight model. And really at the end of the day I think that just comes down to sim limitations. Really the last of any negatives that I can come up with is the prop discs on the aircraft. I think look a little bit ugly. The animation there is a little bit jarring and I think it could use some work. Although do just be aware that I think the recording tool that I've used has actually exacerbated the prop disc model there to make it look a little bit worse than it does in reality. Nonetheless, it's still not the best prop disc I've seen by far. But that's just about it really, that's all I can come up in terms of negatives. Once again, the Cessna 310 is a really excellent, very feature complete, very comprehensive and well made product. A fairly long list of positives for you, firstly touching on the overall modelling and texturing of the aircraft. Modelling is very good, texturing again very well done. To some degree I do think some of the cockpit textures, mainly around the gauges, do look a little bit more cartoonish but still very nicely done. And generally speaking again I think the wide immaculate pretty much covers off the texturing and the modelling. Flight model we've already talked about briefly. The flight model is very good overall for a Microsoft Flight Simulator aircraft. The aircraft handles very nicely on the ground, it feels good during the takeoff. Easy to hand fly, very pleasant to hand fly as well. My only slight gripe there would be with the landing. Again, to me it did feel as though we lost a little bit of elevator authority during the flare, but that could be true to life of the 310, maybe it's just something that one needs to get a little bit more accustomed to. Sounds were absolutely excellent, both in terms of the engine sounds and the overall cockpit switch and control sounds. Very comprehensive sound suite, and I think you'll agree the engine sound absolutely top notch. We did discuss that there isn't really much change in engine sounds with power setting, but again that could be true to life of the real world aircraft. I was expecting to hear a little bit of a change in note there. Change in sound with prop RPM though is very good, and again overall a big thumbs up when it comes to the engine sounds on the aircraft. Systems modelling, some of the best that we've seen in the sim to date without a doubt. For me the real boon of the Cessna 310 is the really rather comprehensive failure system. That's more or less a first for the sim, and once again it really goes to ramp up the ability to accurately simulate flight within Microsoft Flight Simulator. Potential failures are of course a part of day-to-day flying, and it really means you have to fly the aircraft accurately, keep a good eye on everything, operate the aircraft within inside of its limits. We have seen other aircraft that do offer failure modelling, but nothing to this degree. Again, a really excellent system from MILVIZ overall on that one. And the same goes with all of the other little touches that we looked at. It's nice to have the onboard passengers. It's great as well to have the little features like the aircraft getting dirty with use over time. The fact that we can have a persistent state, choose whether or not we own the aircraft personally or whether or not we're renting the aircraft, obviously affecting the various systems set up when you arrive at the airframe. All of these little touches really go to elevate the experience of the add-on and elevate the experience within the sim. It's not unusual, but it's nice as well to have the fairly configurable panel there with various avionics options. With the TDS GTN-XI unit, the aircraft does feel like a very comprehensive IFR suite. The same is true of course if you own the PMS GTN 750. The aircraft is also pretty frame rate friendly, so a good one for VR users. I was getting about 85 FPS in the 310 versus around 90 in the default Cessna 152, so only dropping about 5 frames in total. Very impressive overall given all of the systems modelling that's going on behind the scenes. I think we can just about leave it there for today though. Once again, a really excellent offering from MILVIZ. They've been putting out some of the best products in the sim, and this is arguably their best so far in terms of all the features that the 310 offers. A very enjoyable aircraft. I think it has a ton of potential. Certainly again with that failure modelling, I think we can run some pretty interesting scenarios in the future. It will be releasing very shortly, so an aircraft that's probably well worth keeping an eye on. I do have to say a very big thank you to MILVIZ for letting us take a look at the aircraft today. And thank you to all of you as always for watching the video. I do hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider giving the video a like. If you want to see more content from the channel, then please consider subscribing as well. As ever, a huge thank you to my channel members and patrons for all of your support. It's very much appreciated. Anyway, ladies and gents, as usual, I hope you are having a great day wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.